You walk into your kitchen at 2 in the morning. The house is dead silent, save for the familiar, low hum of the refrigerator. You reach into the cabinet for a glass of water, and then you hear it, a faint, dry scratch right behind the baseboard. A tiny whisper of movement just above the ceiling tile. You freeze. Your hand hovers over the tap. You already know what that sound means, and you know exactly what follows in the coming weeks. The dark, rice-shaped droppings tucked into the back corner of the pantry shelves. The jagged, chewed corner of the cardboard cereal box. That stale, sharp odor of ammonia that takes weeks of scrubbing to fade from your lower cabinets. The standard modern reaction is predictable. You pull out your phone and you look up a local pest control company. Over the next 5 years, the average American homeowner hands over anywhere between $1,200 and $3,000 to commercial exterminators. They bring out chemical blocks, snap traps that threaten your own fingers, or those black plastic boxes that sit silently in your corners. Perhaps you spend $40 a piece on those ultrasonic plug-in gadgets that promise to drive pests away with a sound you cannot hear. Devices that, in my personal experience, do absolutely nothing except lighten your wallet. Stop and think about that scale for a moment. Now contrast it with a different reality. I spent time out in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. The old order farms there have massive corn cribs full of feed, grain dust in the air, open barn doors all day long, and approximately 0 mice inside their living quarters. They pay nothing. They have not paid a single dollar to an exterminator since before electricity reached their dirt roads. I want you to understand something clearly. I am not telling you this because I am smarter than you. I am telling you this because I spent 26 years of my adult life doing this entirely wrong. I bought the 12 packs of classic wooden traps from the big box store and lined them up like little soldiers. I sprayed that bright orange expanding foam into the gaps around my basement pipes, watching it swell up, feeling proud that I had finally blocked the way. 3 weeks later, I sat in my own crawl space with a flashlight and watched a mouse chew straight through that hardened orange foam in a single evening, turning it into soft yellow dust as if it were cotton candy. To a mouse's teeth, that synthetic foam offers zero physical resistance. That was the night something in me broke. I finally got humble enough to ask my cousin's husband, Daniel, who runs a small dairy farm near Lancaster. He laughed that quiet, easy way those men laugh when an English cousin finally asks the right question. He told me I had been buying the wrong material my entire life. But before we look at what he handed me, let us establish an honest limit. This traditional method is highly effective for standard standalone homes, but it is not magic. If you have an open 40-pound bag of birdseed sitting on your garage floor, or a structural foundation crack wide enough to stick your fist through, no method on earth will save you until you fix those underlying conditions first. Understand this. It requires your patience and thoroughness, not just a quick purchase. What Daniel showed me in his milk house was a small, dusty roll of something that looked like fine reddish-gold steel wool. Except it wasn't steel. It was pure knitted copper mesh. It cost about $2 at the local hardware store. He cut a piece the size of his palm with tin snips, cleaned out a crumbling mortar gap around a gas line with the tip of a screwdriver, and packed the copper tightly into the hole until it filled the entire void flush with the stone. He looked at me and smiled. He said, "That hole is closed forever." And he meant forever. You see, a mouse's teeth can grind through pine wood, drywall, soft concrete, and even sheet lead, but they cannot get any purchase on the fine, springy strands of knitted copper. The individual loops simply bend, slip, and push back against their incisors, offering no hard edge to gnaw on. More importantly, unlike steel wool, copper does not rust when exposed to the dampness of a stone foundation or winter condensation. It stays intact for generations. This wasn't a secret. It was simply forgotten. I dug into the agricultural archives and found a Pennsylvania State College Farm Bulletin from 1928. alongside a USDA Farmers Bulletin from the same era. They documented this exact material for rodent exclusion around grain storage. The commercial pest control industry simply stopped reprinting those bulletins after the 1950s. Right around the time recurring chemical contracts became a multi-million-dollar consumer business. But simply stuffing holes from the outside is only half the battle. If you have mice actively living in your walls right now, sealing the exterior holes immediately does not save your home. It locks them inside. They become desperate, chewing through new sections of interior drywall or electrical wiring, which public health data shows is a leading cause of unexplained house fires. The traditional method relies on two distinct motions executed in a strict sequence. You must drive the existing colony out first, and then you lock the door behind them. To make this 3-day timeline work, we don't use commercial poison. Poison leaves you with a decomposing odor inside your wall cavities that lasts 6 to 10 weeks. Instead, we use a specific 2-step strategy inside the house using simple pantry items to consolidate the colony before the final seal. I want to show you exactly how to read the physical runways along your baseboards, the faint, dark grease trails left by the oils in their fur, and how to set up what the old 1936 Cornell Agriculture bulletins called the draw-out method. This is the exact sequence that turns a frustrating, months-long battle into a simple 3-day eviction. To execute the draw-out method properly, you must resist the temptation to act rashly. The first mistake most beginners make is rushing to seal the exterior holes the moment they buy their materials. If you block the foundation today, you trap the nesting mice inside, forcing them deeper into your living spaces out of sheer desperation. We begin instead on the inside on the evening of day 1 with nothing more than a common kitchen ingredient: plain, rolled oats. Not the instant variety, but the thick, old-fashioned oats that carry a deep grain smell. Your first task on this Saturday evening is to locate the active runways. Turn off the kitchen lights, take a strong flashlight, and hold it flush against the floor, shining the beam parallel to the baseboards. Look for the signs. You are looking for a faint, dark, slightly shiny smudge, a grease trail left by the natural oils and dirt in a mouse's belly and fur as it hugs the wall for safety. You will find these smudges most prominently behind the refrigerator, beneath the kitchen sink, where the hot water pipes enter the drywall, and along the hidden sill plates in the basement. Once you identify these paths, place a small, shallow dish. An old jar lid works perfectly, directly in the runway. Pour in 2 tablespoons of dry oats, mixed with just a tiny smear of bacon grease or lard. The fat binds the grain smell and makes it completely irresistible. You must set out 3 or 4 of these dishes across your home, and then you must walk away. Do not set a trap. Do not spread a deterrent. For 48 hours, your only job is to let them eat. When a mouse finds a rich, reliable food source that presents no danger, it communicates this to the rest of the nest. By the night of day 2, the colony will have shifted its entire nocturnal routine. Instead of scattering through your walls or exploring new areas of the house, every mouse is now concentrated on these few predictable feeding stations. You have successfully gathered a hidden, paranoid population into the palm of your hand. On the morning of day 3, the sequence shifts. You remove every single dish of oats from the house. In their place, you will introduce 2 sensory deterrents that turn their feeding stations into an intolerable environment. The first is pure, therapeutic-grade peppermint essential oil. It must be the real oil, which smells incredibly sharp and sharp enough to make your eyes water if you hold it close. Not the synthetic, sweet-smelling air fresheners. Take standard white cotton balls and saturate each one with 10 drops of the oil. Place 3 cotton balls exactly where the oat dishes used to sit. The concentrated menthol vapors overwhelm a mouse's highly sensitive olfactory system, effectively blinding their sense of smell in that enclosed area. Immediately alongside the cotton balls, you will deploy the second layer: ground cayenne pepper. Dust a thin, continuous line of the deep red powder directly across the runway, about 3 inches wide. When the mice return that night expecting their usual meal, they will encounter the burning capsaicin. It gets onto their paws, and as they groom themselves, it transfers to their noses and eyes. It does not cause permanent injury, but it creates intense discomfort. Combined with the blinding scent of the peppermint, their familiar home becomes completely hostile. Within hours, the colony will begin looking for an escape route to the outside. This brings us to the afternoon of day 3, the crucial window where we address the exterior foundation. Put on a pair of thick leather work gloves. The pure copper mesh comes in a tight, springy roll that feels surprisingly heavy in the hand. As you unroll it, you will notice the texture. It is not flat like wire window screening, but knitted in interlocking loops, much like a metal stocking. This design gives it a spongy, elastic property that allows it to expand and lock itself into irregular shapes. With your gloves on, take a pair of tin snips and cut a piece about 4 inches long. Roll it between your palms into a tight, dense wad the size of a walnut. It should feel springy and firm. Now, walk the outside perimeter of your house with your flashlight, a flathead screwdriver, and a tube of 100% clear silicone caulk. Crouch down low, right where the stone or concrete foundation meets the lower edge of your wooden siding. This long horizontal seam is the most common entry point. Look for gaps where the old mortar has crumbled into gray dust, leaving dark voids. When you find a hole, use the tip of your screwdriver to clear out any loose stone or debris. Then, take your copper wad and push it deep into the opening. Use the flat end of the screwdriver handle to pack it in hard. Here is the common mistake to avoid. Do not simply plug the surface of the hole. You must pack the copper mesh until it fills the entire depth of the cavity, pressing it tightly against the interior edges. The springy loops will naturally expand into the crevices of the stone, creating a physical barrier that cannot be pulled out or pushed through from either side. Once the copper is firmly packed flush with the exterior wall, take your tube of silicone caulk. Snip the nozzle at an angle to create a bead about the width of a pencil. Squeeze the trigger firmly, forcing the thick, clear gel directly over the copper mesh, filling the remaining surface gap completely. Use a gloved finger to smooth the caulk down, sealing the edges against the stone. The silicone serves 2 purposes. It seals out the damp autumn air and rain, protecting the structure from water damage, and it glues the copper mesh permanently into its seat, so no animal can dislodge it. Repeat this process at every single penetration point around the exterior. Look closely at the outdoor water spigot, the place where the heavy black air conditioner line passes through the wall, and the small gaps around the dryer vent housing. Pay special attention to the corners of your garage door rubber seal, where the weather stripping often degrades and leaves a dime-sized opening. However, you must leave exactly 1 exit open. Choose a single low-traffic gap on the far side of the house, perhaps a small crawlspace vent or a gap near a basement window well. Do not seal this final hole on day 3. As the cayenne and peppermint drive the mice out from the inside during the night, they will search the foundation for an exit. Finding every other door permanently blocked with copper, they will naturally funnel out through this last remaining opening to escape the burning environment inside. On the morning of day 4, after 48 hours of absolute silence in your walls, you walk out to that final gap with your last wad of copper and your tube of caulk. You pack it tight, seal it with the silicone, and step back. The eviction is finished, and the perimeter is completely locked. To truly trust a method, you must understand exactly why it works, stripped of any folklore or marketing mystery. The success of this traditional approach relies on 2 basic principles: the unique biology of a rodent's teeth and the fundamental difference between how copper and steel react to the environment. Modern pest control relies on chemistry, on creating synthetic toxins that the animal must ingest. The older method relies entirely on physics and animal mechanics. Understand this about a mouse. Its incisors never stop growing. To keep them from growing straight through its own skull, the animal is biologically driven to gnaw on hard surfaces to wear the teeth down. The front of a mouse's tooth is coated in incredibly hard enamel, while the back is made of softer dentin. As they chew, the softer dentin wears away faster, creating a self-sharpening chisel edge that can shear through wood, vinyl, and plastic with ease. When a mouse encounters expanding foam or wood, its teeth act like two sharp wedges driven by powerful jaw muscles, splitting the material apart layer by layer. But when those teeth meet knitted copper mesh, that mechanical advantage completely vanishes. Think of it like trying to chop through a heavy wool blanket with a sharp axe. The blade does not cut. The loose, springy fibers simply gather together, absorb the impact, and slide around the edge of the tool. The individual loops of the knitted copper are completely flexible. When the mouse's teeth press against them, the strands slip into the gaps between the teeth, providing no solid resistance to push against. A mouse cannot bite through something that refuses to stand still under its jaws. After a few frustrating attempts, the animal encounters a biological barrier it cannot solve with force, and it gives up. The second half of the science lies in the metallurgy. Most homeowners who attempt to do their own rodent proofing eventually reach for steel wool because it is cheap and readily available. But steel is an alloy primarily made of iron, and when iron is exposed to oxygen and moisture, it undergoes a chemical reaction called oxidation, creating iron oxide, or common rust. Think about the environment inside a foundation gap. You have cold outside air meeting warm interior air, which creates constant condensation. You have ground moisture wicking up through the stone. When steel wool is placed in that damp void, it rusts completely through within 2 seasons. The structural integrity of the steel breaks down, turning the brittle fibers into a soft, dark red powder that crumbles under the slightest pressure. The mouse simply pushes right through the debris. Copper behaves entirely differently. When copper is exposed to oxygen and moisture, it also oxidizes, but it does not degrade. Instead, it forms a thin, protective outer layer called a patina, a dull green or brown oxide film. This patina actually seals the underlying copper, shielding it from further corrosion. While the steel wool is actively disintegrating into dust, the copper mesh retains its springiness, its tensile strength, and its shape for decades. The 1928 Penn State Bulletins favored copper for this exact reason. It is an inert material in the face of farmyard dampness. Now, let us look at the honest boundaries of this method, because I will not pretend it solves every structural failure. You must know exactly where this works and where it is guaranteed to fail. First, let us talk about the surfaces. This copper and silicone method works exceptionally well on hard, porous, and uneven materials. It binds beautifully to old fieldstone, poured concrete, brick mortar, cinder block, and heavy timber sill plates. The texture of these materials allows the silicone to bite deep into the surface, locking the copper wad into a permanent matrix. However, this method fails completely if you attempt to use it on smooth, flexible, or low-energy plastics. If you try to pack copper mesh into a gap between 2 pieces of vinyl siding without a solid backing, or along the slick, oily surface of a flexible polyethylene drainage pipe, the silicone cannot form a proper structural bond. The flexibility of the plastic will eventually cause the patch to delaminate and pull away, leaving a clean gap for pests to exploit. For smooth plastics, you need mechanical flashing, not mesh and caulk. Second, consider the size of the breach. This approach is designed for exclusion, not structural engineering. It is highly effective for gaps ranging from the size of a pencil lead up to about 1 inch in width. If you encounter a massive structural failure, such as a foundation wall that has buckled inward, leaving a 2-inch chasm where the house has settled, stuffing it with copper is an exercise in futility. A gap that large allows too much draft and shifting. The weight of the house or the movement of the earth will eventually dislodge the plug. Large breaches require structural masonry repair, hydraulic cement, or heavy-gauge galvanized steel hardware cloth bolted directly into the framing. Finally, you must recognize environmental limitations. If your home is surrounded by unmanaged fields, tall brush touching the siding, or wood piles stacked directly against the foundation, you are creating a high-density pressure zone. The sheer volume of rodents competing for territory means they will constantly test every square inch of your perimeter. While the copper will hold the holes you patched, the intense pressure will eventually force them to find a new vulnerability higher up, such as a loose soffit vent or a roofline intersection. The method only holds if you manage the immediate perimeter of the structure. Keeping wood piles 10 feet away and vegetation cut back from the stone. Understanding these physical and mechanical limits is what separates a master practitioner from someone who merely tries a trick they saw online. The old ways work beautifully, but only when you respect the laws of the materials and the nature of the animal you are working against. To truly understand how this knowledge slipped away from the modern homeowner, we have to look back to a specific turning point in American history. Before the mid-20th century, self-reliance was not a hobby or a lifestyle choice. It was the baseline of survival. If you operated a multi-generation family farm in the 1920s, a rodent infestation in your grain crib or your root cellar did not mean a minor annoyance or a messy cleanup. It meant the potential loss of your winter food supply, the contamination of seed stock for the coming spring, and a direct threat to your livelihood. Because the stakes were so high, the solutions had to be permanent, cheap, and entirely mechanical. The practice of using copper mesh did not originate in a corporate laboratory. It grew out of the practical necessities of the early 20th century. When the United States Department of Agriculture established its cooperative extension system, its primary mandate was to take the empirical, field-tested wisdom of successful traditional communities and document it for the public good in the late 1920s and throughout the 1930s. Researchers at institutions like the Pennsylvania State College and the New York State College of Agriculture at Cornell spent years studying the habits of farm pests. They published their findings in plain, text-heavy bulletins printed on cheap paper, distributed directly to farmers at county fairs and grange halls. The USDA Farmers Bulletin No. 1638, published in 1930 and titled Rat-Proofing Buildings, explicitly detailed the use of heavy metallic meshes and non-corrosive metals, like copper, as the gold standard for blocking animal entry points around structural sills. They noted that while steel screening failed rapidly under the damp, corrosive conditions of animal housing, copper remained completely impervious to the elements, preserving its physical structure decades after installation. The Old Order, Mennonite, and Amish communities of Pennsylvania and Ohio did not invent these scientific principles. But they did something arguably more important. They preserved them. While the rest of industrializing America embraced the convenience of the post-war era, these communities kept their focus on methods that required zero ongoing dependence on external corporations. When the chemical revolution of the 1950s arrived, bringing with it synthetic rodenticides, like warfarin and disposable mass-produced snap traps, the modern consumer landscape shifted almost overnight. The extension bulletins were quietly retired. The old manuals dropped out of print, and the standard practice shifted from permanent structural exclusion to a model of perpetual, recurring chemical maintenance. But the truth is, the paper may have aged and the ink may have faded, but the physics never changed. The copper mesh you can buy today for a few coins works exactly the same way it did when Herbert Hoover was in the White House. It requires no specialized training, no chemical licenses, and no expensive equipment. It only requires a pair of work gloves, a steady hand, and the willingness to slow down and look at your home with the patient eye of a craftsman. Understand this. The real value of this traditional method is not just the $20 you save on a box of traps, or the hundreds you save on an exterminator's quarterly contract. The real value is the shift in your own position from a dependent consumer to a self-reliant caretaker of your own property. When you kneel down by your foundation on a quiet Saturday afternoon, clear out the dust of a crumbled century-old mortar joint, and pack that bright, springy web of copper into the void, you are not just plugging a hole. You are participating in a long, unbroken lineage of practical knowledge that dates back generations. You are choosing a solution that respects the biology of the animal, the chemistry of the earth, and the integrity of your structure. I invite you to stop tolerating the midnight scratching, and I invite you to stop paying for temporary fixes that are designed to bring a technician back to your door every 3 months. Take one weekend. Walk down to your local independent hardware store, the kind with the wooden floors and the bins of loose brass screws, and ask for a simple roll of pure copper mesh. Spend one morning on your knees investigating the perimeter of your home, finding the secret doors you never knew existed, and closing them one by one. There is an immense, quiet satisfaction in lying in your bed at 2 in the morning, listening to the absolute silence of a secure house, and knowing that your home is clean, dry, and protected for the next 50 years because of an afternoon of honest work and a $2 roll of wire. The old ways were never proven wrong. They were simply forgotten because they were too efficient to be profitable. The knowledge is right here in front of you. The materials are sitting on the shelf. The choice to take your house back is entirely in your hands.